Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Everyone, welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. My name is Dave McFadgen, and I'll be your host. And today, I'm really excited to welcome Howard Bloom back for his second session of a three-part series as Sensemaker in Residence at the Stoa. The title of this series is Everything You Know About Nature is Wrong, the Case of the Blooming Cosmos. And if you're new to the Stoa, I'd let Howard give his lecture, however long that takes, 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll pivot to Q&A. Feel free to start dropping your questions in chat immediately, and we'll get around to it. It'll help me find your questions if you prefix it with a Q or question. And then eventually I will ask you to unmute yourself and then you can ask your question for Howard. This is being recorded, so if you don't want to be on YouTube, you can just indicate in the question and I will ask for you. And with that, welcome back, Howard.
Thanks, David. Hi. Okay, in our last exciting episode, we talked about the origins of the universe. And we talked about how the theory of entropy is so antithetical to everything that the universe is and was in its beginning, that it's surprising that any scientist with the least knowledge of the history of this cosmos could believe in the theory of entropy. Tonight, we're going to try to tackle the origins of life, the origins of complex adaptive systems, and a bunch of other heresies. We consider as some of the primary sins materialism, consumerism, waste, and vain display. And the fact is that this is a cosmos that revels in materialism, consumerism, waste, and vain display, and that these sins somehow lead to something that you could call spiritual in a strange and secular kind of way. So when we last left off, it was the era of the great gravity crusades. Atoms had discovered that they were very, very subtly attracted to each other via a force that had never reared its head before. This was at 380,000 ABB after the Big Bang. And they started gathering in gravity glumps, in gravity balls, first in galaxies, then in stars. The first hierarchy appeared. You know, we think that dominance hierarchies are a product of capitalism and post-agricultural and post-industrial society. They're not. In the Great Crusades, the Great Gravity Crusades, gravity balls went up against each other. The biggest gravity ball always swallowed the smaller gravity ball and became even bigger. Then it went into another confrontation with another gravity ball. Well, eventually, some gravity balls became dominant and caught fire. We call those stars. Some gravity balls worked out a way not to be swallowed by the bigger gravity balls. It was by traveling in a circle, orbiting around the biggest gravity balls. In other words, they became subservient. Those were planets, some planetesimals, some big chunks of gravity balls of matter. Worked out another compromise with the planets themselves and became moons. So we had the beginning of the first dominance hierarchy. The trick is that in the beginning, in the first couple of million years of this cosmos's existence, in the first billion years, the biggest gravity balls caught fire and became stars. Those gravity balls, some of them, the biggest of them, lasted only 1 million years each. And then they began to collapse in upon themselves. And they died in truly gaudy ways. Now, we think of nature as kind and generous, but nature gave birth to death at their very instant. But nature is not content with evil. she tends to use it for, appallingly, for creative purposes. And up until then, up until a million years ABB to a billion years ABB, there were only three kinds of elements in this universe: hydrogen, helium, and lithium. So when stars began to collapse upon themselves, all they collapsed with was hydrogen, helium, and lithium. But the pressures in their hearts were so intense that those stars jammed hydrogen, helium, and lithium cores together. And those larger cores stuck together, some of them. And the result was 95 new forms of elements. Oxygen, carbon, iron, nitrogen, all the rest that we're familiar with came from this era of massive destruction, the destruction of entire stars. So if you, again, you go back to entropy, everything should be falling apart in randomness. But everything is doing the opposite. Everything is falling together. And every time things fall together in new agglomerations, those new agglomerations take on an emergent identity of their own. And that emergent identity becomes the next level of reality, the next level of supersized surprise. Well, we only know of this happening on one planet. We do know that there was supersynchrony and supersimultaneity all over this universe. In other words, atoms formed at pretty much the same time, in pretty much the same three identical forms, all over the universe. Galaxies formed in pretty much the same form, all over the universe, roughly in the same time frame. Stars formed at pretty much the same time, all over the universe. There was replication, duplication, whatever you want to call it, without suns having communication with each other. And yet they came out pretty much the same, operating pretty much according to the same laws. Well, when we had 98 elements, 98 kinds of atoms, atomic nuclei, instead of just three, something weird began to happen that science has not chronicled. And the best thing to call it is nucleogenesis or moleculogenesis. It was the beginning of even bigger social agglomerations. Remember, an atom with 98 protons and neutrons in it is a pretty complex social aggregation. But now we started to have social aggregations of these elements, of these atoms in molecules. And somehow, over the course of the next roughly 10 billion years, the universe managed to put together a whole bunch of biomolecules, biochemicals. In other words, chemicals based on carbon. And it put together these molecules all over the place, in interstellar dust, in spicules of interstellar ice. Just about everywhere you looked, you could find these biomolecules. Then there was a peculiarly appalling planet. It was the home of climate change. It was the home of climate catastrophe. It revolved around its core every 6 hours. So for 3 hours, its surface would be subject to this poisonous stuff called radiation. Then it would be exposed to something equally poisonous, darkness. And in between, every 3 hours, the temperature would go up and down 88 degrees. That's climate disaster. That's global warming and global cooling on a big scale. Plus, the planet was tilted on its axis. And as a consequence, as it went around its sun, it had what we calculate as 4 seasons: summer, winter, fall, and spring. Major climate problems, major weather changes. And yet, these audacious molecules, whose origins we can't trace, on this planet managed to put together even bigger social aggregations. And the social aggregations they put together were they indulged in manic mass production. They also indulged in manic mass destruction, and they were narcissistic. They made copies of themselves. And their task seemed to be to kidnap, seduce, and recruit as many dead atoms as they could and bring those dead atoms into this new process. And the new process was life. How life came to be, we do not know. Life is not the child of randomness. Remember, 6 monkeys and 6 typewriters, according to the theory, will eventually type out all of the works of Shakespeare. No, that's not how it happened. All life on this planet was based on DNA, RNA, and cells. All of it, no matter where you looked. If life was being put together by random processes, why all of this radical similarity? And life was profoundly social. Now remember, this cosmos had been profoundly social from its very beginning. Remember the first quarks that couldn't exist on their own and had to come together in groups of 3 in order to survive? Remember the neutrons that had to get together with protons in the first 10.5 minutes of their existence, or they fell apart? They could not survive. This universe was profoundly social from the get-go and profoundly communicative. Remember attraction and repulsion between quarks? That's communication. Well, these mega molecules, okay, we have the theory of the selfish gene. And the theory of the selfish gene says that a gene will do everything possible to make copies of itself. Well, if that's true, Richard Dawkins, why was it that genes cannot exist on their own? There is no such thing as a gene on its own. A gene is a part of a string. It's a part of a team. Now, we consider 11 men on a football field to be a team. We consider 5 guys on a basketball court, if I've got my numbers right, to be a team. The minimal team in which genes seem capable of working is 400. 400 genes, the size of almost 40 football teams. And outside of that team, a gene cannot function. So where the heck is the selfish gene? For God's sakes. Genes are profoundly social. And there's something else. There's a basic in the computer world. If you want to put together a successful learning machine, you put together a learning machine that's composed of individual agents. And those agents work on a simple rule, a Darwinian algorithm. To those who hath, it shall be given; from those who hath not, even what they hath shall be taken away. In other words, when your computer system is up against a problem, the elements within it that contribute to the solution to that problem are fed energy and influence. They're fed connections to other elements within the system, and they're fed the elements, the energy that they need to multiply themselves. For example, one of these systems that operates according to these computer algorithms is the immune system. Well, your immune system has roughly 10 billion different kinds of elements just waiting around for an invader that isn't part of the body. And most of those have never seen use in their entire lives within you. So they're like the homeless of the immune system. They are fed almost nothing in the way of resources. They are fed almost nothing in the ability to reproduce themselves. Well, imagine that a new invader comes in, a new variation on COVID, and none of the existing elements in the immune system are capable of grappling with it. One of those homeless elements, one of those impoverished elements that has never had influence and has never had much in the way of resources, but has managed to hang in there nonetheless, may well discover that it can grapple with this new invader. And if it succeeds in doing that, it is given resources and influence galore It is given the resources and influence it needs to multiply by the gazillions so that it can confront the new invader. So the major rule of a complex adaptive system of a learning machine is feed influence and resources to the elements that are helping confront what seems to be the problem of the moment, and take those resources and influence away from those elements that are failing. Now, here's where this is relevant to life. Not only is the world of genes a world of teams, it's a world of between 430,000 genes, all working in a team, because if the team fails, every gene within it fails. But the first creatures we know of were bacteria. And bacteria cannot live on their own. I had the impression way back when I was writing Global Brain, my second book, that because bacteria were so profoundly social, if you isolated a bacteria, put it on its own, it would die of isolation. And I called James Shapiro, who was one of the leading researchers on this topic, and said, James, am I right about this? And he said, no, you're absolutely wrong. What will a bacteria do if you isolate it so it's all on its own? It'll make a new community of bacteria. It will multiply as fast as possible. So I was right. No gene is an island. A gene can't live on its own, but it doesn't just give up and die. If it's in total isolation, it'll make a whole new community. Bacteria work in massive communities. A bacterial colony the size of your palm is so thin you can't see it. You may have one there right now and you don't know it because it's so thin. But it contains more individuals than all the humans who've ever lived. A bacterial colony this size contains 7 trillion individuals, all communicating with each other, all using attraction. Look, I have a friend, Valerius Geist. He's a terrific evolutionary biologist. And he says that all signals between living elements are either attraction cues or repulsion cues. Well, hey, guess what? In the very beginning of the cosmos, when quarks were busy getting together, what did they communicate with? Attraction cues and repulsion cues. So bacteria are constantly giving each other attraction cues and repulsion cues. When bacteria find a rich source of food, many of them go into a homesteading phase. And you can tell they're in a homesteading phase because they develop these thick stalks that attach them to their food with a glue that's more powerful than any glue we humans have ever been able to make. But when they give birth to children, when they multiply, when they divide, their children don't have stalks. Instead of stalks, their children have long cilia, long whips, propellers. In other words, the parents are built to stay in place and stick to the food for all they're worth. The children are born as racers, as explorers. And those children go out in groups of 10,000, because bacteria just don't do anything on their own, as search parties. And they look for new sources of food. And they scoot over territory that's foodless until they find a new source of food. And then they develop stalks and they give out attraction cues, meaning this is a rich place in which to live. This is a buffet. Come join me here. But if a group of 10,000 goes out on a trek looking for new food, and all it finds is a hostile wilderness, all it finds is territory that's poisonous to bacteria, it will fold up its genome in a neat little package and send it out, and then will kill itself off. Yes, it will kill itself off. And these neat little packages say to the home colony, this is a dangerous place. Do not come here. Those are repulsion cues. Now, the strange thing is, these bacteria that found nothing kill themselves because they are built with an internal suicide program. And when you were a kid, you may have tried this. You take a box and you lift it off the ground a little bit. You put a forked stick under it to hold it up. You put a string on the forked stick and you put bait under the box. And if a bird is unwise enough to come to that box, from a distance, you yank the string, it pulls the stick. When the stick comes out, the box falls down and you've trapped the bird. Well, apoptotic programs, pre-programmed cell death programs, are built like that contraption that you built. They are built for a default state of die, kill yourself off, commit suicide. Now, and you and I, do we ever experience anything like this? Anything that's the least bit apoptotic that's suicidal? We certainly do. You study for 3 weeks for an upcoming math exam. You walk into the exam room, you open the booklet, and you forget everything you ever knew about math. Is that a survival instinct? It's the very opposite. It's a suicide instinct. You part from the person who you thought was the love of your life. You go into depression, and it hurts. It hurts big time. Where does that pain come from? Your own biology. That's your self-destruct mechanisms speaking to you. And why do you have self-destruct mechanisms? Why do you wish you could crawl into a hole and die when you are seriously embarrassed? Sometimes. Because you have the same mechanisms that make a bacterial colony into a complex adaptive system a learning machine, or that make your immune system into a learning machine. When you seem to be contributing to the problem at hand, you flourish. Other people flock around you. You have the hormones, you're filled with the hormones of victory. You strut around. You sometimes, if you don't remember that you've got to watch yourself, you sometimes become impossibly arrogant under the influence of all of this occasional popularity. But if you're not contributing to the problem at hand, you're built to kill yourself off, or at least to marginalize yourself and impoverish yourself with things like absolute paralysis, or interior pain, depression, romantic pain, which is one of the worst of them all. Hang on a second. We have to use there. Bear with me. This is unsightly. But okay, so complex adaptive system, first of all, every living form we know functions in groups. I mean, there are groups like there are cats out in the wild, leopards that seem to be loners, but in reality, they've parsed out a territory between themselves. Each one has her own territory in a larger landscape and is still part of a social organism, not to the extent that we are, but part of a social organism nonetheless. So this is a universe of teams. This is a universe of social aggregations. This is a universe of attraction and repulsion cues. This is a universe of learning machines, at least once life starts, approximately 4 billion years ago, between 3.5 billion and 4 billion years ago. And it's a universe of self-destruct mechanisms. Remember, those early stars that died, leaving 95 new forms of atoms in their wake, they killed themselves off, for God's sakes. And they did it in the gaudiest display you can imagine, fireworks beyond belief. And what happened? According to entropy, everything should have fallen apart. No, things fell together at their heart. And complex adaptive systems, living systems, things are always falling together. And and you could say there's a reason for all this falling together. Once upon a time, there was less life on this planet than the material in your thumbnail. And that life was up against a severe problem. This, as I said, is a planet of climate catastrophe. And it has every 26.5 million years approximately, it has a huge climate change, massive, totally destructive climate change. So this planet has been through between 142 and 148 mass extinctions. Your job, if you're part of the life in that thumbnail sized bit of life on this planet, is to come up with as many ways to turn your environment into food, to turn poison and obstacles into food, to kidnap, seduce, and recruit the material around you into the enterprise of life, to come up with as many ways of metabolizing your environment as you can before the next climate catastrophe. And life has done this very successfully. Life has been colonialist, life has been imperialist, life has been particularly colonialist, because life forms are constantly setting up new colonies in impossible places. Right now, 12 miles beneath your feet and mine, there are bacterial colonies eating raw rock, kidnapping, seducing, and recruiting granite, and turning it into the stuff of life. Then someday, other life forms will come along and eat the life forms that took the granite and turned it into life stuff. As far as life is concerned, this is not a planet running out of resources. I mean, the life has barely scratched the surface of the stuff 12 miles beneath our feet that can be kidnapped, seduced, and recruited into the process of life. So that is the heart of the beginning of the story of life. And I wish I could tell you more colorful stuff. There is tons of colorful stuff to tell. I mean, for example, we'll flash forward a long, long way to multicellular life and to the switch from bacteria, which have their genes in a ring at their center, and what are called eukaryotes, which have their genes in strictly structured libraries protected by special membranes at their center. And it's the eukaryotes, the ones with this complex database at their center, this library of genetic material. Those are the ones that became multicellular. And one story from approximately 120 million years ago. There were these the origin of sexuality, that's roughly 1 billion years ago, and that is a big question. But somehow there were these plants, and these plants were sexual. And these plants, at their heart, gave birth periodically to both their equivalent of sperm and their equivalent of eggs. Well, now they had a problem. They were giving birth to sperm and eggs. How do you keep your own sperm from inseminating your own eggs? They matured their sperm at a different time from their eggs in order to pull this off, and their sperm was equipped to travel on the wind. Well, traveling on the wind to another plant to inseminate it is very, very iffy. Meanwhile, there were these new animals that could do something absolutely absurd. They had wings, they could fly. And the new animals were constantly stealing the pollen and nectar of these poor innocent plants. And then what I'm going to tell you is anthropomorphic, but the equivalent of this happened in genes. And then some plants came up with a great idea. These flying things are busy stealing our pollen, our nectar. Why don't we encourage them to steal our pollen and our nectar so that they will fly to plants that are identical to us, part of our species, and will carry our sperm to these distant plants? And why don't we put up big billboards advertising, come here, we'll give you free pollen and free nectar? The big billboards are what we call flowers. They're flower petals. The flying things are insects, pollinators. And what plants had worked out was a multi-species deal with insects to act as their Federal Express and UPS. So not only is this a profoundly social universe, it's a profoundly collaborative universe, but it is also a profoundly competitive universe, and it's nature that has invented death and pain. Not humans, not industrialism, not patriarchy. It's nature that has invented death and pain. So in my view, nature has given us certain dreams. Carl Sagan thought that we were built with the dream to fly, that it's been with us for as long as we've been human beings, roughly 200,000 years. But we've also been built with a dream of peace. And if we are built with a dream of peace, surely our purpose on this earth is to mitigate, to diminish as much as possible the amount of death and pain, and yet to do even better at the creativity that this nature has pulled off to this date. So if there were more science on the origins of life, I'd have a richer story to tell you. But we don't understand the origins of life. We haven't really been able to put together that story. We don't even understand the origin of molecules. If you look up the word moleculogenesis in Google Scholar, you'll find almost no references to it whatsoever. Big pieces of the story of this universe and how you and I got here are missing from science. But nonetheless, next time we'll go into the story of the origins of human evil from my book, The Lucifer Principle. So, David, have I done that in the appropriate amount of time?
Yes, that was perfect amount of time. We've got almost an hour for Q&A, so feel free to start dropping your questions in chat. We'll get to them. I'll warm up Howard with a couple questions of my own. You seem to refer to nature as a person, a woman in fact, and your language denying that life arose randomly, that there was intrinsically social. You seem to be gesturing at some kind of telos, some kind of purpose to nature, which is drifting dangerously close, in my view, to intelligent design. So I'll give you the opportunity to confirm or deny that.
Well, I am an atheist. You know, I discovered I was an atheist at the age of 12, so I've been an atheist for a long time now. And I don't believe in intelligent design at all. I mean, if the universe is so complex that it needs a creator, who created the creator? And then it's creators all the way down. It's not a useful form of reasoning at all. And yet the universe does what I call, it pulls off what I call material miracles. It is constantly gestating new supersized surprises. And we go back to the problem. Remember George Henry Lewes and John Stuart Mill sitting around in the living room? I think I covered this last time, contemplating a simple problem. Let's go back to Aristotle. Aristotle said that if we break things down to their elements and we understand the laws of their elements, we understand everything we need to know. And those are what we call today elementary laws. That's a tribute to Aristotle. So take two bell jars of gas. Do we know the laws of these gases? Of course we do. You can stick your hand in them. They're invisible to us. They have a certain amount of pressure. They're amorphous. Okay, now take those two jars of gas, put them together, light a match, and put the match in. What should we get here? According to Aristotelian logic, add a gas to a gas and you get twice as much gas. Add one apple to another apple and you get two apples. That's all you're going to get. Put a match in, all you're going to do is heat a little bit of the gas. But what does happen? This extraordinary explosion. An explosion from two perfectly placid bell jars of gas? You've got to be kidding me. And something even more surprising, this substance that wibbles and wobbles, that quivers. You know, matter doesn't quiver, for God's sakes. And then it slides off the table, falls in your lap, and you're too embarrassed to get up and walk around because people think that you've urinated on yourself. And this strange stuff that comes along with the explosion is water. It's a liquid. So they were wondering, how the hell does this happen? It's not predictable according to the kind of math that Newton has introduced for understanding this cosmos. And first, John Stuart Mill tried to come up with a name for it. He called it heterotrophic causality. And it took another 40 years before George Henry Lewes came up with another name for it. First, he called it copula, and that name did not exactly take off. It was the Victorian era. You couldn't really name something after copulation. And he came up with another phrase, emergent properties. And the phrase emergent properties has stuck. And then he and John Stuart Mill produced a long quote in which they said, in essence, until science and its equations can predict emergent properties, science isn't science yet. And they left us with this problem in 1874, which is when George Henry Lewes came up with the phrase emergent properties. And we still haven't solved it today at all. And the history of this universe is a history of the emergence of emergent properties, supersized surprises. And it does feel as if there's been an invisible stairway to heaven. And that every time we take a step, we take an invisible stair and bring it into the realm of visibility. When, for example, the first atoms formed and electrons discovered that they could only travel within a certain shell, and then if they got a quanta of extra energy, they could go outward, but they could only go to another very specific shell. Where the hell do those shells come from? Those are emergent properties. Is there something roughly equivalent to spirit anywhere in this universe? In a sense, there is, because if you put a proton together with an electron, you regard that as a new form of matter, hydrogen, helium, lithium, and the properties of hydrogen, helium, and lithium are not from the elementary particles. They're from the relationship between the elementary particles and some larger reality that shows its head when you put an electron and a proton together. Presumably that larger property, those shells, for example, around the proton, were sort of there from the beginning, but invisible. So we do seem to be climbing a stair step of discoveries of what the next emergent properties may be. And we've been doing this for 13.8 billion years. So in that sense, there is a telos. There are all these invisible stair steps above us that we will struggle mightily to find, most of which we will not find in your lifetime or mine. And yet somehow they seem to be there implicitly. So the future seems to be as really there in its own strange way as the past. And teleology, is about, telos is Greek for goal. And it does feel in a strange way as if this universe is climbing a stair step toward goals. And it's very bizarre because we're not allowed to think like that.
Good answer. Ryan Biggin had a question. Are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Hey, Howard. This is Ryan. Well, it's pronounced Bayesian, like Asian with a B on it, but felt like begin. So yeah, I've gotten all kinds of pronunciations over my life. And actually, you may recall, Howard, we met briefly at Tea Lounge near Prospect Park in Brooklyn
amazing.
back in 2014. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my God. We had such an incredible conversation, and then learning about you after the fact, I realized why, and I've been following your work ever since. So I'm really excited to pose a question to you here. Yeah. So there's many specific ways that I could pose this question, and so I think it may be best to just keep it in the general sense. So my question is, if consciousness can be in any way considered separately from matter?
It can't. You know, a flame is a very ethereal thing. It dances around. If you didn't mind getting burned, you could put your finger through it. In many ways, it really isn't there. But the one thing it needs, if you've got a flame over a charcoal briquette that you saturated with lighter fluid, and you try taking the charcoal briquette away and leaving the flame all by itself, sorry, the flame is going to follow your charcoal briquette. It's not going to stay there. Without the matter, the flame can't exist. Without the matter of you and me, consciousness apparently can't exist. But we have a big problem with this, Ryan. According to the laws of supersimultaneity and supersynchrony, pretty much the same thing happens at pretty much the same time, no matter where you look in this universe. Stars are pretty much the same, planets are pretty much the same, galaxies are pretty much the same. Presumably molecules are pretty much the same. And if that's true, there should be life all over the place. There should be life carpeting this universe from one end to the other. And yet we have been diligently looking for signals from life for the last 50 years, since Carl Sagan started the SETI project. And guess what? We haven't found a single clue. Not a single clue. So as far as we know, we are the only life in this entire universe. And okay, what was your question again? I'm wandering.
No worries. So yeah, and like I said, there's definitely many specific ways that.
Oh yes, can it exist without the matter? No,
Yep.
It apparently can't exist without the matter. I mean, remember, most of what we see in a star is ethereal.
Mm-hmm.
It's light. We see a star because of the light it gives off. Could that light exist independent of this giant fusion nuclear ball called a sun? Well, yes, light manages to travel for 12 billion years, 12 billion light years across the face of the cosmos without any direct connection with the star that gave it birth. But without the star to give it birth, it wouldn't be there. So no, matter has what you could call spiritual properties. I hate to use that word. Let's call it ethereal properties, so we don't go bouncing into the realm of spirituality. But ethereal properties, those are emergent properties, and they're all over the place. And at some point, just as the immaterial relationship between an electron and an atom became the next solid thing on which the universe was based, elements, hydrogen, helium, and lithium, someday, presumably, consciousness will become the great solidity on which new things are based. But that will be way after your time and mine, unfortunately.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I really like the answer, and it actually is essentially what I suspected you to respond with as well. If I could, a quick follow-up to that as well. So, as you mentioned that, consciousness may eventually, become in the new state such that, matter, is currently the building blocks, I guess is one way to look at it. So then is it fair to say that consciousness then essentially is a product of matter, that matter has produced consciousness?
Yes, in the same sense that an electron and a proton produced hydrogen. But in fact, hydrogen is a property so beyond anything that an electron and a proton can imagine in their own way, that it's not an electron and a proton. It's something utterly beyond. It's a new level of reality. It's a new stair step of supersized surprise. And consciousness is going, presumably, if this universe continues the way it's gone for the last 13.8 billion years, consciousness is only the introduction to the next levels of supersized surprise. And we already know that because we have a collective consciousness. We've created accidentally a noosphere, to use Teilhard de Chardin's word. We have this new form of emergent consciousness that's a combination of you and your cell phone. It's a combination of you and all the apps that you're a part of. I mean, Google is doing things for us today that that libraries did for us 20 years ago. And we went through, you probably don't remember, but I certainly remember, having to go to the library, figure out what books the answers to my questions might be in, fill out little pieces of paper for them so the librarians could go down into the stacks and find the books, waiting for an hour until those books came, looking through the books, discovering that the answers were not in any of those books, but at least getting some hints about where to look next. And now we can do all that in 30 seconds on Google. I can, when I'm putting together my Wednesday night broadcast for 545 radio stations, I can go through literally 50 to 100 sources in a half an hour. It's as if I had access to that library in instant time, the library that I used to go to with the 5 floors of stacks. So we are giving birth to new things every time somebody invents a new app. And they're not quite as startling as consciousness itself, but there are new levels of emergent property that may well lead to the next giant step upward, the next supersized surprise. Does that in any way provide an answer to the question?
Yeah, no, you've more than answered my question and actually just created additional questions. But but before running down any rabbit holes, I'll just thank you. And I guess if I'd like to pick your brain more, I'll just have to try to have another happenstance interaction with you at some coffee shop another
yes,
time.
Hopefully now with the age of vaccines, coffee shops will begin to function again.
Yes. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks, Ryan.
Hi, Howard. Thank you for doing this. It's a pleasure to get to hear you. And I loved that charcoal analogy, so elegantly kind of sums up something that's often convoluted. My question is, in the Lucifer principle, you spoke about the superorganism and ideas or memes as the primary forces behind our world. Do you think we can take the reins and kind of in the theme of mimetic design, create a superorganism of all powered by a meme of total inclusivity or global unity?
Wow. We would have, look, there's one guy who's more talented at meme production, or at least in creating absolutely viral memes than anybody else in my lifetime. And his name is Donald Trump. And he has been practicing the art of getting attention for himself in the media since the late 1970s. So if my arithmetic is correct, that's close to 50 years of knowing how to work memes. Those of us who consciously try to craft memes don't do as well as he does at all. This is a guy who has no education, understands no history, has a really wimpy IQ, but he has a tremendous gut feel for how to make himself a perpetual headline, for how to make himself a headline every 2 hours, a whole new headline every 2 hours. So are we rational crafters of memes going to come anywhere close to this visceral creator of memes for the sheer sake of personal attention? No, not until we get the art of it. Not until we have not just the craft and the logic, but we have the art of it. We have the feel for it as deeply as his. And what else has made Donald Trump so successful in meme crafting? Persistence. He's utterly and completely driven by his ego's appalling hunger, astonishing hunger for personal attention. And that has made him one of the most persistent meme crafters on the planet. His memes are not sophisticated, they're simple, they're stupid. Immigrants are going to rape your wife and kill your child or something like that. They have no relationship to reality whatsoever, but they do have a relationship to a reality. They have a relationship to the emotional reality within us. So their lack of relationship to reality in the outside world, in a sense, it makes no difference. But in a sense, it does. Because if we had done what South Korea had done with COVID, when COVID first arose, if we had had a vigorous program of testing, if we had done what the South Korean leader had done and brought in the heads of his major biotech firms and said, drop everything you're doing, create tests for COVID. And if he had isolated people, if Donald Trump had isolated those who have COVID, the way the Koreans done, we would have had by now approximately 30,000 deaths in the United States. Instead, we've had closer to 530,000 deaths. 500,000 people have died. So Donald Trump's memes may have fit what's in our gut, what's in our heart, but it hasn't fit reality, and it's failed a massive test, and it's killed as many people as World War I and World War II combined. So those are the two tests of truth: the deep internal test and the test in the external world. So what we need is art. What we need is the kind of art that's driven by the gut, and yet has, I hate to say rational goals, because I think the cult of rationality is overdone, and we don't understand what we're talking about when we're talking about rationality. But yes, has our ideals in mind, and also fits the exterior world with which we have to cope the way we're making. One of the points of Global Brain, my second book, is that the microbial world is rich in research and development. And human society today is getting richer every year in research and development. The number of people involved in research and development today is so vastly greater than the number involved in research and development 100 years ago that it utterly defies belief. But there is a race going on between these two worlds and their complex adaptive systems, their learning machines. And we see it with COVID, that race. The microbial world is racing to out-research and development us. And we are racing to catch up and get beyond it too. What does this all produce for life in general? Astonishingly new areas of richness, realms of richness, at the price of your death and mine, of COVID possibly.
If I can ask a quick follow-up, not to put Trump in a bucket, but do you have any examples of, we'll say, positive meme exemplars, meme creation exemplars that you admire?
Yeah, the guys who sat down and wrote first the Declaration of Independence and then the American Constitution 250 years ago. They were operating on a totally mistaken theory of nature. It was the idea that Newton's style of opening up nature would open up everything in human affairs as well. They were operating on the idea that natural laws existed that really don't exist. But thank God, I don't know how they got there, but they got to this form of government that allows you and me a voice. And I think it was brilliant. And then there's Voltaire. I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. We've had meme crafters of the Enlightenment who've been tremendously helpful and have changed the nature of what it means to be human. And hopefully you and I will get to participate in something that reaches as deep and changes as human nature as much for the better as Jefferson, Hamilton, and Madison. All deeply flawed men like you and me.
Yeah, hopefully we do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elliot.
Lynn, you had a question?
Hello, Howard. You and I spoke last time.
Yes, I remember. It was wonderful.
Yes. I don't know whether you will feel happy with this right turn, but I want to, like, I see you as a phenomenon. Like you are, like I have a sense of learning, but also delight in when I hear you, and like so it's really about you as a person. And my question is, and it's in the chat, but like, where did you start to first attune to the frequencies that you are communicating? Like, to me, like you have, for some reason on this planet, you have this ability to kind of see through matter and have this very universal view. And I'm thinking of your career and your life and just how crazy, and you know, the popular culture scene that you came from. So if you would be so kind, if you would reflect for a moment, self-reflect on, like, how did you get here, and when did you first start to feel it, and what is your unique intent, do you think? Like, what is your place? You know, are you like a comet, like just moving through? And yeah.
Lynn, I was given a tremendous gift in the form of a tremendous horror when I was a baby. World War II came along. America got involved in World War II when I was a baby. And my father had just started a tiny little dusty hole in the wall liquor store. And all of a sudden, despite the fact that he was 33 years old and had a wife and a baby, he was drafted because America was desperate. And the result was that my mom had to take care of the liquor store. And because my mom had to take care of the liquor store, I was left alone. Now, my mom, who was an incredibly intelligent, competent person, made a huge mistake. If you or I had been trying to hire somebody who would take care of the kid, we'd have hired a babysitter. And implicit in the title, babysitter, is paying attention to the baby. But instead, my mom did something incredibly stupid. She hired a cleaning woman. And the job of a cleaning woman is to pay attention to the vacuum cleaner and the tiny postage stamp sized rug, and listen to daytime soap operas on the radio. So I was locked in a windowless corridor with a hard, cold wood floor behind one of those folding baby gates. And that's how I spent the first years of my life. Locked out, I could see the light of the window with the sunlight in it way, way off in the distance, but I couldn't get anywhere near there. So I was raised without other human beings because the babies, the cleaning women did not regard me as something of importance. They spent no time with me. There was no face-to-face contact, nothing. I didn't know their names, and I was crawling in those days, so you feel the coldness of the hardwood floor. And I've been an outsider my whole life. And it was horrible, and it was painful, and it was the greatest gift I could have ever been given. One day, I was at a rock concert, because you know I worked with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, people like that. And so I was at the concert, and I had an all-access pass, and I used to see the audience from the very back of the room and go to the soundboard and watch, and I roamed everywhere. And I went into the first 15 rows because I wanted to see how the people on their feet for the whole concert felt. I wanted to feel what they felt. And the band asked us to clap along, so we all started clapping, including me. And then I noticed something very strange. When my hands were like this, everybody else's hands were like this. When everybody else's hands were like this, my hands were like this. So somehow I was not born as one of you. And it was monstrous. And, 50 years of clinical depression with pain, emotional pain every minute, every second of every day. But what a gift it has turned out to be. I simply cannot see things the way other people see them. I can't. I can understand how they see things, but I can't feel that way. So does that answer the question in any way?
Howard, I'm sure others on this call with me thank you for that personal story. Like, that's amazing. And I'm wondering if your ability to not be the same, allowed you to pull out of the crowd and then become like a fabulous producer who's able, like, is there a relationship between your stance on the world and people and your relationship to like what made you successful for so many years? Like, can you make that connect?
Well, yes. But first, I'll tell you one more story. So once the war was over and my dad had come back from the war, my parents immediately had another baby. And he was the first child in the family because I'd never been a child to them. He was the first baby. So other kids in Buffalo, New York, my hometown, wanted to have absolutely nothing to do with me, except for when it came time to beat me up or humiliate me. My parents didn't seem to have any interest in me whatsoever. When it came to having a family, they had my brother, who was the baby. And one day I'm sitting in my family's living room and a book appears in my lap. And you know how you know the location of every book your parents own, because ever since you came to consciousness, the books have been in exactly the same place. They haven't moved at all. Well, this is a book that had no place on the shelves. I have no idea where it came from. And I opened it up and it said the first two laws of science are these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it mistold the story of Galileo. It told the story as if he had been willing to go to the stake to defend his truth, which 30 years later I would find out was not right. But I needed the heroic version of the story. And the second law of science: look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. Look for things that you and everybody around you take for granted and are thus invisible to you. Bring them into visibility, and then proceed from there. And it gave the example of Anton von Leeuwenhoek, who invented the microscope. And all of a sudden, Lynn, I had two playmates who could not reject me or humiliate me for a very simple reason. They were dead. And science has been my life ever since then. I got involved seriously in microbiology and theoretical physics. And by the age of 12, had built my first Boolean algebra machine, because I was reading 2 books a day. I was just obsessed. So I built my first Boolean algebra machine at the age of 12. I co-designed a computer that won some science fair awards in the days when computers were the size of a building. And I was taken off to a meeting with the head of the graduate physics department at the University of Buffalo. I'm 12. If you're the head of a graduate physics department, you don't have time for a 12-year-old. And we sat in his office discussing the hottest topic of the day, Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe and the interpretation of the Doppler shift, for an hour. And he came out and put his hand on my shoulder and said to my mom, you don't have to save for grad school for him. He'll get fellowships in theoretical physics at any school he wants. And then my mom pulled off a coup. She got the head of research and development for the company that made the valves for the first plane to break the sound barrier, the Bell X-1, and the first plane to take humans to the edge of space, the Bell X-2. So she got him to tutor me in outside the box science. So science was my life, period. And it's been my life ever since, except I believe that science has an aspiration to omniscience, that's science's job, an aspiration to omniscience. And so
Howard, can you make that connection back to what was the music piece then?
The music piece was, I was obsessed with music. In those days, we had turntables and with an automatic spindle, and you could put 6 records on the turntable and just listen all day long while you were reading, and then you could listen all night long while you were sleeping. And I did that, but more important, when I was 12, I realized I was an atheist. My parents were trying to drag me to high holiday services. I didn't want to go. I was holding on to the door frame of their blue 4-door Fraser automobile. They were pulling at my socks and my ankles, trying to drag me up the street. And I had a sudden realization. Galileo took an instrument designed for horizontal viewing. It was designed to see troops coming over the horizon. And he dared to turn it up. And what did he see up there? Everybody knew what was up there. You couldn't do that. That's God's underwear, for God's sakes. You don't look under God's underwear. Plus, it's all perfect circles. Aristotle told us the only perfect form is the circle and the sphere. So it's all perfect circles and spheres. And no, he discovered rocky lumps up there in the heavens, and he changed our relationship to the universe. Anton von Leeuwenhoek was a draper. He imported fabrics to Amsterdam. And he used a lens, again, for horizontal viewing, to look at his fabrics and see how tight the weave was. And then he decided to grind his lens a little bit differently and look down. And he looked down at pond water and he looked at human sperm. And these are the 2 examples. I mean, these are the 2 examples that powered my life. And again, if we can imagine a God who's omniscient, then it's our job to be omniscient. If we can imagine a God who's got every power in the world, then it's our job to have every power in the world. And I realized as my parents were tugging at my socks, Galileo turned the lens up, Anton von Leeuwenhoek turned the lens down. There are no parents, there are no gods in this picture. There are no gods under the earth. There are no gods in the sky, but there are gods in this picture. Where? Inside my parents, in the utter and complete passion with which they are trying to drag their firstborn child up the street at the risk of mashing his face to hamburger on the pavement. And if those gods exist in my parents, they exist in me. So my job is to take that lens and turn it inward. And that quest for finding the gods inside of us, I was lucky I stumbled into a field I knew nothing about, popular culture. I was lucky I stumbled into rock and roll, which I knew nothing about when I first got involved, because that's the land where the gods were. That's where the ecstatic experiences that I was looking for were. And I spent 15 years of my life as possibly the greatest expert on the planet. It's a horrible thing to say. In those gods within us, for Prince, Michael Jackson, Bob Marley, people like that. Because that's science's job, Lynn. Take the things that we don't even see and bring them into visibility, and then try to understand them.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Wow. Thank you. I'm complete.
We hope.
Another question.
Hi, Howard. Thanks very much so far. I'm really enjoying this thread of nature turning into morality. Maybe not in the most direct sense, but there's a little thread in there. I notice if you try to take entropy and turn that into morality, it's just not going to go anywhere good. And it seems like we're kind of getting somewhere where there's this tension between that narcissistic desire to replicate self, and at the same time the need for community to survive with. Like that's been there right from the first principles in last week's talk. So I guess my question is, where do we go from here? And I admit I was really attracted to Elliot's question about creating a meme that that takes one side of this morality. And it seemed to me like the answer to that question was where we go, one we go all, but the Americans seem to get a kind of bad taste in the mouth with that one. Maybe in what it actually is supposed to mean. Maybe there's something in there that can take that that thread of nature to morality in there and then do something in the real world with it. Sorry, that was a very convoluted question.
Well, okay, here's the deal. Are there any natural imperatives built into us? There are several. One is lifting the poor and the oppressed. How do we know that's built into us at a fundamental level, that it's not just something we've conceived in the last 3,000 years? I think I told the story last time, but if you are a young, strong, powerful male chimpanzee, and you want to be the dominant chimpanzee, you put together an alliance of other big, strong males like you, other bullies, and you challenge the dominant male. And if you defeat that dominant male and you become the dominant male, you got there by favoring a little group of fellow bullies. But all of a sudden, you have to change your orientation totally. You have to look out for the most poor and oppressed in the group. If the poor chimp on the bottom of the social totem pole is being beaten up, you have to not jump in with the bully who's beating him up, which was how you got where you are. You have to jump in to uphold the poor and the oppressed, to defend him or her. So justice, that's justice, upholding the poor and the oppressed, is built into something that comes probably from a common ancestor of chimps and human beings. And chimps and human beings parted on the family tree 6 million years ago. So justice goes very deep within us. There's something else that goes very deep within us. This life has had space programs over and over and over again. Once upon a time, all life was in the sea. And then imagine that you are my daughter and you have this audacious, ridiculous idea. There's all this poisonous stuff up above us. It's exposed to radiation. It has very little moisture. There's nothing to eat up there, and you want to go there. It's territory above our heads. It's called land. And I tell you, this idea is ridiculous, that you're going to die up there. Well, has life died on the surfaces of land? Not at all. Not at all. And then there's a point in dinosaur history, and I probably told you this last time too, where in essence, a bunch of dinosaurs weren't content with wandering the face of the earth and decided on a space program. They were going to go up. They were going to fly. And if we had been their parents, we would have said, you were crazy. Everything good is down here on the bosom of the earth. The earth gives you food. The earth gives you shelter. And there's nothing up there. There's nothing to eat. There's no place to shelter. So if you go up there, you're going to die. That's what we would have said as nice conservative dinosaurs. And instead, our crazy kids took to the skies. And guess what? The dinosaurs, the old conservative dinosaurs, are all gone. They're not around anymore. The ones who clung to the rich and green bosom of the earth. The ones who took to the sky are not only up there still, there are twice as many species of them as there are of land-walking animals, which means there are twice as many ways of making a living in the sky. And they live 60% longer, those sky creatures, than the creatures on the earth. Is nature trying to tell us something? Yes, look up. There's an old Bloomism, a nation that looks up goes up, a nation that looks down goes down. Our job is to craft a picture of a paradise we can create by taking life to the skies, by gardening the solar system and greening the galaxy. And hopefully, I mean, pictures of paradise in which the poor and the oppressed are uplifted have motivated humankind over and over and over again. And hopefully those new pictures can motivate the West once again, because otherwise the Chinese are going to get there and own the solar system. They have plans for it already. And they don't like things like freedom of speech. And I can't live in a country without freedom of speech because the only thing I've got is my ability to speak and to write. Does that in any way answer the question?
I'll have to introspect and see if it does. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thanks, Megan.
David.
Yeah, thanks, David. Hey, Howard. I'm interested. I'm fascinated. I've been following your stuff for a while, and I'm interested. It's nice to see a deeper exploration of the physics part of it, and this has been very fun. I'm curious if you've seen the Brian Keating podcast with Eric Weinstein and Stephen Wolfram on their two competing, or maybe competing, theories of everything. I posted the link in the chat to the YouTube channel. It's on the Into the Impossible podcast. It doesn't matter so much if you've seen it or not. I was just really fascinated with the way they interact with each other. And the real question is, there seemed to be a proliferation of theories of everything right now that seem to be touching on similar kinds of areas with slightly different perspectives, but novel in a way that goes beyond string theory. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about why that is, that there's a profusion of theories of everything now these days.
Well, it's hard for me to say, David, because I have one. But my body of work back in the 1990s, around 1998, I realized I was losing track of my work and I was going to have to find some way of organizing it. So I started a table of contents to my work in the computer. And today it has over 10,000 entries, and it's about 550 pages long, but the title is the relevant part. Title from the very beginning has been the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including the human soul. Then about 10 years ago, I ran into a film director who looked at it and said, no. It's not the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including the human soul. It's the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including sex, violence, and the human soul. So yes, I have this little body of work, and I've tried to sum it up simply. You can sum up Einstein in E equals mc squared, and matter tells space how to bend, and space tells matter how to move. Once you've got those two things, you've got an awful lot of the theory of relativity. Well, I've been trying to boil mine down to a few simple things, but it's 9 pages long. And that's long for a grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including sex, violence, and the human soul. But the ultimate tool, okay, when I was 12 years old, my parents could see that I just wasn't doing well in public schools at all. I wasn't doing well because I was reading a book a day under the desk and then reading another book at night when I got home. I paid no attention to my teachers. And my parents got me an interview with the headmaster of a private school. And I walked into his office. David, this is just appalling. I'm appalled. I walked into his office and I said, I'm only going to come to your school on the following conditions. A, you will teach me Russian because Russia is going to be an important country in the future. And B, instead of teaching me your normal set of science courses, biology first, chemistry second, and physics third, you will teach me physics first. So you teach me the origin of elementary particles and atoms in the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory was still very controversial at the time. Then you're going to teach me chemistry, so you can teach me how those atoms interacted socially. Then you're going to teach me biology, so you can teach me how those molecules interacted. Then you're going to teach me anthropology, so I can see the primitive roots of human culture. And then you're going to teach me history. And in other words, at the age of 12, for some bizarre reason I haven't been able to track down, I already had a timeline. And I've been adding to that timeline ever since. That was 1955. And every piece of information I get, whether it's about politics, poetry, or physics, goes on that timeline. And the result is you can see the relationships between things. And you can see how wrong entropy is. You can see a universe that's falling up, not down. That's constantly falling up, not down. So, but the idea was that there are grand unified theories and that Maxwell managed to add to what Newton had done and created a grand unified theory. He brought electromagnetism into the same realm as light and gravity balls. And there must be a grand unified theory beyond that. And Einstein was looking for that up until he died, because he literally was working on his grand unified theory while he lay there in bed, and he put down his pen and he put down his paper, and he didn't wake up again. So it's a very engaging idea. Plus, ever since the beginning of philosophy, there has always been a spot for the great man of philosophy, the one who will be remembered through the ages. You know, back in the days of the Iliad, to be a great man who would be remembered through the ages, you had to kill a lot of people. This was a big step up, that with your ideas, you could become the dominant figure of your time. And humans are attracted by attention. Attention is the oxygen of the human soul. And where is the center of attention? A grand unified theory that goes beyond Einstein, that goes beyond Maxwell, that goes beyond Newton. So we're stuck with it, us science types, to aspire to be the big man of our time.
Beautiful. Just a comment. I don't know if you need to respond to it or not, but paying attention to Maxwell's demon, the notion you mentioned Maxwell, and so I was paying attention to Maxwell's demon, and I thought it's interesting thinking about Maxwell's demon as the controlling the door between two halves of a room full of gas and separating the fast-moving particles from the slow-moving ones. But I thought a cell could effectively be seen as that, the semi-permeable membrane that lets something inside or outside of the cell, opening and closing the door to the cell in a way that has the demon encapsulated in that process. And I don't know if that actually matches to anything, but you mentioning Maxwell made me think.
No, it does. I mean, you know, the universe breaks the laws of entropy every minute, every second, every Planck unit of time. It's why Maxwell's demon, which is an entropic idea, should still be around, is utterly beyond me, because it doesn't fit external reality any more than Donald Trump's approach to COVID has fit our battle with the microorganismic world.
Getting close to time, so last question goes to Yui.
Is that me, David?
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Hello again, Howard. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Lewis, it's a pleasure.
So, going back to Lynn's question a little bit. Well, first, a quick like personal note, and it's that I can empathize with this feeling of being the outsider, and with this experience of having to learn to understand others. I had to build a bridge for myself from being completely incapable of relating to sort of starting to understand how to put myself in other people's shoes, so to speak. So it was something really refreshing to see as I'm reading your book. To be able to relate to those moments when you talk about your time in high school and your time in the different moments in history, and how you're like seeing people like at a party, and you're like gaudy and looking down and sometimes covering with clouds and so on. So anyway, can relate to that, and it's so interesting and so lovely to be able to see that as well. And so as I'm reading your book, I see in you someone who is so in contact with his unique perspective and this unique sense of self that is so unique, so different, and so uncompromisingly you that, pardon this phrasing, but the cosmic consciousness can't help but support you along your way and bring to you all those cooperative components and those things that in some way add to that, what did you describe, 500-ish pages of content and things. So anyway, I just a little bit of a reflection from the book, and then so my question is, so I'm really curious that as an atheist, how do you reconcile this very scientific approach to life, this starting with like there is no God, and I don't know what goes in this bucket of atheism for yourself, but assuming that that's it, right? So scientific approach to life, atheism, and that on one side, with also the magic that you've described in your stories, these things that come at just the right time, even the book that you mentioned in the answer to Lynn, and how like you knew where every book was, but then this one comes out of like God knows where, and it's just got the right info for you at the right time. And then from the book itself, you talk about like, oh, I'm fresh out of a job, or I need these things, and then the right person comes and says, oh, the clothes you're wearing are amazing, and I'm gonna make this story about you and the clothes you're wearing, and then someone comes and makes a whole wardrobe of these things, and like all these things, like what are the odds, dude? So how do you reconcile this, like the universe is in this way, but then all these things come and they happen and they're carrying you forward?
Well, that's a really, really good question. And if you set yourself up for a zillion interactions, one of them is going to fit the need of the moment. It may not fit it in a way you've ever imagined in your life, but it still will fit what you, I mean, we humans are built like Lincoln logs. We humans are built like Legos. We're built with all kinds of ways of connecting with each other, of making larger structures. So it's not surprising that when two people collide and they have needs, that on rare occasion, those needs fit each other. But you're right. I keep talking about the fact that this is not a 6 monkeys and 6 typewriters random universe, that we're on certain, the universe proceeds to unfold as if it were a railroad train, which can only ride on the rails and can't ride across cornfields, can't fly in the sky, can't tunnel under the earth, can't do all kinds of other interesting ways of getting to its destination. There are rigid constraints in this cosmos, and our needs are built to fit each other's needs. So in a sense, it's natural that if you put yourself in the way of enough accidents, and here I'm talking randomness, which I don't believe in, but if you put yourself in the way of an accident, somebody's need is going to fit your need as well as the little cleats or whatever they are on Lego bricks fit each other. That's a dodge. That's not really a good answer.
Something that to put there in the old back burner in the brain.
Except there is a lesson from it. And the lesson is never allow those feelings, that tell you that you should hold up at home and you shouldn't see another human being. Never allow the fear of even going outside, because you can develop that after being inside for a few days. And never allow your fear of interacting with other human beings to stop you. Keep going out. Keep interacting. You need it. And the other thing, in answer to Lynn, is because I have never been accepted by groups except as their leader, I see groups in a way that people who are part of groups all the time don't see groups. Because for other people, I would imagine, because I've never been another person, but I would imagine that other people take the group environments in which they live as naturally as a goldfish takes the water in which it's swimming. Well, you and I are humans. We can stand away from the goldfish bowl and see the whole bowl in its entirety. I was never allowed in any groups except as their leader. Groups started making me their leader when I was 8 years old, which is really surprising when you consider how much these kids hated me. And so because I need desperately groups as much as anybody else does, but I can't be part of them, I see them. They're visible to me. They're one of the things right under our nose that's invisible to us, that it's our job to bring into the realm of visibility. So group behavior, from the group behavior of quarks to the group behavior of human beings, including ecstasies, ecstatic experiences, that's been my job because it's so clearly visible to me.
I love it. Thank you, Howard. And again, to add to your answer, I think that one of the things that makes your approach so unique and something that everyone can learn from is that you're so uncompromisingly yourself that the attraction and repulsion message that you're sending out is crystal clear, as opposed to other people who are like, oh, ambivalent, maybe, yeah, but I'm not saying what I really think, type of thing. So you're like, boom, clarity. And so that's like, yes or no, boom.
Well, I'm lucky. I'm lucky that all these horrible things have happened to me, right down to 15 years of illness and being in bed and 5 years too weak to talk. Everything has turned out to be an advantage in the end.
What a lesson. Thank you so much, Howard. One final thing, I did send the email. I'm really curious to learn about the Hartbloom Institute, so whenever you have a chance.
Oh, good. Okay, so send another email, because look, it's an ever tumbling cascade of emails, and I miss a lot of things. So send me another one, and because our next meeting is Friday at 10 o'clock Eastern time, in 4 days or something like that.
Awesome. I'll send one right now.
Okay, thanks, Lewis.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Likewise.
All right. Howard, what can we expect next week? What's on the menu?
Next week, we're going to go into the origins of evil, and the origins of economies. So we're going into the realm that's covered by The Genius of the Beast, a radical revision of capitalism, which is about, again, economies. I mean, you could see economies at work in bacteria. And the Lucifer principle, which is about the origins of evil. And we will probably go into Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul and Power Pits of Rock and Roll a bit. And we've done that tonight a little bit.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to all the people that had questions. Those were great. And thank you so much, Howard. Look forward to next week.
All right. Have a good night, David. Have a good night, all. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience.